Hey folks, I'm Tom Ballard, the groundwater guy, here with part 2 of our series on PFAS and agriculture. In this video, I'll discuss what types of crops are most affected by PFAS contamination. Just a reminder that PFAS stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. Normally, we think about these forever chemicals in terms of impacts to drinking water supplies, but in this short video series, we're examining how PFAS can impact agricultural land and crops. PFAS contamination in agricultural land affects different types of crops in varying ways, primarily depending on the plant's ability to absorb and accumulate these chemicals. Some crops are more susceptible to PFAS uptake, while others show lower transfer rates. Here are the key findings on which crops are most affected. So number one is leafy greens. So high transfer rate, leafy greens such as lettuce have been shown to have high capacity for PFAS uptake from contaminated soils or water. This makes them particularly vulnerable to accumulating dangerous levels of PFAS. And health risk. Because leafy greens are consumed directly and have high surface areas, they pose a significant risk for human exposure to PFAS through diet. Number two, root vegetables. Moderate transfer rate, root vegetables like carrots and beets can also absorb PFAS, but studies suggest that the chemicals tend to accumulate more in the leaves than the edible root portions. So this is good news, but still they do tend to accumulate in the root portion, also just not as great as a level. However, this does not eliminate the risk entirely, as some PFAS may still be present in the roots, like I mentioned. Number three, grains and cereal crops. These have low to moderate transfer rates. Grains such as wheat, oats, and corn generally show lower levels of PFAS accumulation in their edible parts, which is obviously the grains or ears if we're talking about corn, with most of the contamination occurring in non-edible parts like stalks and leaves. This makes grain a relatively safer option for cultivation on contaminated land compared to leafy greens. Number four, hays and grasses are like forage crops to produce hay for livestock. High transfer rates. Hay and other grasses used for animal feed can absorb significant amounts of PFAS, which is problematic because livestock then consume the contaminated forage and can accumulate PFAS in their tissues and milk. This has led to severe contamination issues in dairy farms, particularly in regions like Maine, where we've seen this showing up. Number five, fruit-bearing plants. These have a low transfer rate. Plants that bear fruit like tomatoes and berries, and yes, tomatoes are a fruit. That's the controversial item. They're not a vegetable, they are a fruit. But tomatoes and berries, fruits tend to have lower transfer rate of PFAS from soil into the fruit itself. This makes them less likely to accumulate harmful levels of PFAS compared to leafy greens or forage crops. And number six, specialty crops like garlic, asparagus, things like that have low transfer rates. Certain specialty crops like garlic and asparagus have been found to have low uptake of PFAS from contaminated soils, making them safer options for cultivation on affected lands. In conclusion, crops most affected by PFAS contamination include leafy greens and forage crops like hay and grasses due to their high transfer rates of PFAS from soil or water. Root vegetables and grains show moderate susceptibility, while fruit-bearing plants and certain specialty crops like garlic and asparagus exhibit lower rates of contamination. Understanding these differences is crucial for farmers managing contaminated land and for mitigating human exposure through food consumption. That is our show for today. Thank you very much for listening to this short video. We will continue on with part 3 in our next video.